The most salient way to describe the flywheel of Pendulum is 2 years ago, we launched our Acromancia product. We sold 1,000 bottles in 10 days. And I was like, holy smokes, we sold 1,000 bottles in 10 days. That's awesome. Last year, we launched Metabolic Daily. We sold 1,000 bottles in 3 days. And then last quarter, we launched our GLP-1 probiotic, and we sold 1,000 bottles in 8 hours.
Welcome back to the Fitt Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Venere. Today I'm joined by Colleen Cutcliffe, co-founder and CEO of Pendulum Therapeutics. In this episode, we discuss the intersection of gut health and metabolic health. Colleen shares insights on developing novel probiotic products. Plus, we discuss the future of preventative health, the impact of GLP-1s, and Pendulum's mission to improve Healthspan. Let's get into it. Today's episode is brought to you by EGYM. EGYM provides fitness and health facilities with smart workout solutions built on its ecosystem of hardware, software, and partners. But it's more than cool tech. Their connected training experience delivers business results while helping members reach their wellness goals. If you run a gym, health club, YMCA, or any kind of fitness facility, you should check them out. Visit egym.com to learn more. Hi, Colleen. Welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat. Maybe to kick things off, for those who aren't familiar, could you introduce yourself and tell us about Pendulum?
Sure. So I'm Colleen Cutcliffe. I'm one of the founders and the CEO of Pendulum Therapeutics. I'm a scientist by training. This is my first company. And so I've learned a lot of stuff by fire since we started, which was a little over 10 years ago. And Pendulum Therapeutics is a microbiome biotech company that is developing novel interventions that help people with health through their microbiome.
Doing a little bit of research for this conversation and just thinking about starting 10 years ago, the amount of, kind of research and science, and you mentioned kind of developing these novel kind of therapeutics. How do you even begin to arrive at, this particular idea, concept, company, and then transition it from that into, an actual product?
I think in the early days and even now, we've always been very product centric. And the big opportunity was that the microbiome space from an academic standpoint was really exploding. And we know that things like probiotics and yogurts have been on the shelves for a long time, but those ingredients that are in those products, there hasn't been any real innovation in over 50 years. And what microbiome science is premised on is DNA sequencing. So the fact that you can now sequence the entire microbiome and you can start to figure out how do they all work together allows you to then go after new strains or new targets of opportunity for health. And I think at the heart of that was just this idea that the microbiome was going to be really important for us understanding all the different ways that you can impact someone's health, and that it was going to be a player that we hadn't really thought about before. We think about the heart, the brain, the circulatory system, but the microbiome and how it could impact all those different networks, we didn't really know how to do that. And so, over 10 years ago, when we had this idea, it was you could make products that could really help people do the microbiome. How we were going to do that was totally unclear, but we knew we could use science to at least figure out where to directionally go. And that was really where we started out. And in fact, our first investors were the Mayo Clinic. So it wasn't really, a hardcore VC off Sand Hill. It was a venture fund that was embedded in a clinic that said, we also believe that microbiome is the next frontier of human health. And luckily they believed in us, and here we are.
Obviously, now it's coming into the mainstream in a much more impactful way. Awareness of microbiome and metabolic health and probiotics, prebiotics. What does that mean to you? Coming from science and a clinical background and in the lab versus maybe what people think of that when they think of like the trends and the products that currently exist, and maybe how do you even go about bridging that gap?
Well, first of all, I think it's super exciting that things like gut health and metabolic health are coming to the forefront of people's minds. And those are trends that we had no idea were going to hit at the same time that we had a product portfolio coming out that was going to address exactly those needs. So that's just luck. But what I would say about people's perception of gut health and people's perception of metabolic health is, look, it's not that far off from how we think about it from a scientific and in the lab standpoint. The basic premise of the microbiome is that we have a microbiome that in our guts and in our nasal passages and on our skin, and these microbes or these bacteria and viruses and fungi that make up the microbiome, they play a really important part in our health as well as in disease. And we are constantly under attack. Our microbiome is constantly under attack and being depleted through things like stress and nutrition and aging, and for us women, menopause. And so I think people recognize as they age that they're starting to lose functionality in lots of different arenas of health. And so pointing to the gut and saying, well, there's an opportunity there to alter my gut and to really help with all these different systems. I think that's fundamentally what people believe, and believe in the gut. And we do too. And so I think that is where I think we're all in lockstep together on that promise.
And when it comes to, you mentioned the kind of product portfolio beginning to identify this and then go to market. What does the product portfolio look like now? How do you think about those offerings and really how that differentiates or kind of stands out as it relates to other companies or solutions?
I think the intersection of gut health and metabolic health is one where Pendulum is super uniquely positioned. Most of the companies that talk about gut health or the microbiome are focused on really the GI system and things like, oh, you have better, it improves diarrhea, constipation, bowel movements, and all of that. But the next level of what the gut can do for you is it actually can help you improve your metabolism. And we could get into this if we want to nerd out on it, but your microbiome stimulates your body's natural GLP-1 hormone, which is what all these GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy are trying to mimic. And so there are some really powerful things that your gut microbiome is doing to actually boost your metabolism. And so we've really been leveraging microbiome science to identify these novel strains and novel ingredients and formulations that can help people on their metabolism or metabolic health journey. And we have right now in our product portfolio the world's first and only probiotic that can actually lower A1C and blood glucose spikes in people with diabetes. Right now on the market, there's just drugs that do that, and there are no probiotics that can do that. And so it's a really big deal to introduce something that is at the intersection of gut health and metabolic health and to have readouts that people can look at and say, my A1C did actually go down. And so that's, I think, the unique positioning of Pendulum in this arena.
What is you know, again, not super well versed on the science or clinical side of this. So when it even we're talking about developing these strands and putting them into a pill and developing the different solutions and targeting it towards the metabolism or GLP-1 kind of mimicking. How is that even developed? Like where does one begin to say, oh, this is how we develop it and it's proprietary and this is what differentiates it?
Well, it kind of all starts in the DNA sequence and biochemistry science. It all starts in the lab. And
Yeah.
so, effectively, what we began with was this belief that there were novel targets of opportunity in the microbiome. And so then you say, okay, well, I'm going to exclude all the things that are already out there. And I just want to look at like what's new that hasn't been discovered or delved into yet. And so we did DNA sequencing of different healthy people's microbiomes and then sick people's microbiomes. We matched them up against databases. And so there was a very heavy R&D in the company. In fact, we were an R&D organization for probably 8 years, the first 8 years with nothing else there. And so that's where it starts, and identifying based on what's happening in the lab and what's happening algorithmically, where's their opportunity to create an intervention. And then really just trying to go right into humans and testing ideas and seeing if they work. And so the first 8 years of R&D was figuring out algorithmically and in the lab what's an opportunity, getting it into people, running clinical trials, and then once we had an outcome that was positive, we were like, holy shit, we made something that can actually change somebody's metabolism. That's when we started all the like, okay, how do we scale up manufacturing? How do we bring this to market? And that is a totally different beast.
It's super interesting that evolution and mentioning the R&D shifting, maybe going between those two worlds, like deep research biotech R&D, and then hey, how do we scale up a consumer brand and product and distribution and all those sorts of things? Is that almost like two separate organizations, or how did you integrate those in a way that you were able to bring it to market?
Yeah, they're super integrated, and I think that's really important because you can't. I think if you're running R&D completely separate from your marketing, then the R&D folks are kind of like flying blind. Like, how are they going to think about product if they can't understand who are we trying to market to and who would benefit from things in this space? And then similarly, the marketing folks are flying blind if they don't understand, like, how is this product differentiated? What is it actually doing that's a value prop to a person who might buy? Or, what can I tell them to expect when they start on the product? And so those are very much integrated. And the company really has R&D, manufacturing, and commercialization all under one roof. And those three are very tightly coordinated. And people talk a lot about this concept of the flywheel. And for us, I think probably the most salient way to describe the flywheel of Pendulum is 2 years ago, we launched our Acromancia product. We sold 1,000 bottles in 10 days. And I was like, holy smokes, we sold 1,000 bottles in 10 days. That's awesome. Last year, we launched Metabolic Daily. We sold 1,000 bottles in 3 days. And then last quarter, we launched our GLP-1 probiotic and we sold 1,000 bottles in 8 hours. And so that really showcases not only being able to develop better and better products for the different markets, but also the marketing platform and how sophisticated it's become, month after month, year after year. And so that flywheel can only be enabled if you've really got your innovators hanging out with your marketers.
Yeah, everybody kind of in lockstep, it sounds like. What do that ramp up, really impressive in terms of how quickly the sell through is and what you're seeing in terms of, consumer adoption, marketing, all the things talking about it being integrated. Obviously, you're contributing to that, but is there something specific you attribute to, like, hey, this is what's working from a channel or partnership or distribution? Where are you seeing success to be able to ramp up that quickly?
Well, I think at the heart of it is always it's product, product, product. I'm a product centric CEO, clearly. I think if you can, and especially in health, if you can make a product that actually works in ways that people can feel it or see it or measure it and share it, that is at the heart of success. I'm not a marketer by training, so there are definitely people who can take a similar and market the hell out of it and create a market opportunity. But I think from my perspective, if you want to make an impact in health with somebody like the background of somebody like me, it's about creating novel products that people can share out and experience benefit from. And so everything else falls, all the go to market, all of that comes from this fundamental belief that the product must work and it must be different from the other things that are out there. And so our go to market to consumers is test, go measure your A1C, wear a continuous glucose monitor, do your gut microbiome testing, and get those results for yourselves. And then we also sell through healthcare practitioners. And it's the same thing. We're really showcasing to them the kind of benefits that they can expect to see in their patients. And we have these two channels also even co-marketing to each other. Like when customers come back and show us their data, we basically hand it back to them and say, go bring it to your doctor and then tell them to call us. And vice versa. When a doctor showcases that, efficacy with their patient, we take it out to our consumers and say, check out what Dr. So-and-so saw with their patient. And so all of the marketing and all of the channels and all of the partnerships and the coordinated products that work with ours are all centered around we can show you the product works. So any devices, diagnostics, reporting that shows that is awesome to work with.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple things there that are probably worth digging into a little bit. The obviously consumer, but then healthcare partnerships, there's the research. When it comes to business model, what does that look like today? And maybe how has that evolved from the time where it's, primarily R&D to now getting multiple different products out in market? What does that break out to, whether it's revenue wise or even like channel wise, consumer, healthcare, however you think about it?
I think that the R&D part is still actually a super important component of the company. And what's happened over the last decade is that the number of academics that are going after the microbiome has gotten a lot larger, and the tools that they can use have become more and more sophisticated. And so for us, really maintaining those relationships with those academics and trying to understand all the new learnings around the gut microbiome, because it is still a new space. We are still learning a ton about it. I think that's really important. And it's important in the context of the business and the business model because foundationally, we can only really partner with people and with physicians and with groups that also fundamentally believe in products needing to work and that we don't know everything about these things. And I think that when you have that kind of set of values, that really makes it super easy to find the right partners because it's not actually driven. Oh, I hope none of my investors hear this. It's not actually driven by revenue. It's not driven by top line revenue. It's driven by the mission and the principle of the company. And if we really are aligned with people whose mission it is to help millions of people improve their health through the microbiome, we'll only end up with the best partners. And that's important for legitimacy, brand, and why I wake up in the morning and want to do this job.
And then the other thing that I wanted to come back to was you mentioned just the proliferation of diagnostics, wearables, health data, people having access to that. To some extent, there was, you mentioned, gut health and metabolic health coming to the forefront in the mainstream. This same thing happening with diagnostics and data. How do you think about leveraging that? Because people are interested in it, they are using these devices. How you can kind of lean into personalization, diagnostics, and then fit in Pendulum where it makes sense for them and also prove that it's working.
Oh boy, the holy grail of personalization. I Some of these diagnostic tests are awesome. Like continuous glucose monitors are awesome. I mean, they give you real-time data that is your data about how your body is responding to the foods that you're eating in your day-to-day. And, the accuracy of that technology has continued to improve and gives you real insights that are actionable. And like, for example, the first time I wore a continuous glucose monitor, I used to like drink grapefruit juice in the morning, like just like a little shot of grapefruit juice. It like started my day. I felt refreshed, energized, ready to go. And I thought this has got to be good for me. It's a fruit. And what I realized was that in my first thing in the morning shot of a major, like just sugar bolus, like my CGM was insane. I mean, just spiking out of, control. And then of course, if you can eat like a protein before you do something like that, it totally changes that. And it changed my life. Like literally, you will never see me drink grapefruit juice first thing in the morning ever again. And so really actionable data can come out of that. On the gut microbiome tests, I know that there is going to be a day where I'll speak as confidently about those tests and feel really great about what they tell you and how actionable they are. I don't think we're there yet, but I do think we will get there. And what it's going to require is a little bit of a catch 22 for people to believe and have faith that we're going to get there. But we're only going to get there if people take the tests and put their data into the database. So for anybody who's doing those gut tests, I think the key thing is pick a company, stick with that company, do longitudinal data points, get your data back, take a look at how it's changing. And that's the way that you're going to contribute to the science that's going to get us to those tests being really, I think, at the same utility as CGMs.
The Fit Insider Podcast is brought to you by our friends at EGYM. This is an exciting partnership for us, and not just because EGYM makes some of the most innovative fitness products out there, but because the entire EGYM team, led by their CEO Philip, is committed to making health, fitness, and well-being more accessible for everyone. And that's a mission we can get behind. By combining their smart equipment with integrated software and hundreds of connected partner brands, EGYM helps fitness facilities stand out by delivering a personalized, gamified workout experience that improves outcomes and member engagement. So if you're a gym or health club operator thinking about how to best serve your members while driving business results, go see what EGYM is up to at egym.com. Yeah, it raises an interesting point, which is the interest in the adoption of these new technologies, whether it's diagnostics or, you know, gut health tests or wearables. But then it's not quite there yet in the sense that you would look at it as a scientist and be like, yeah, this is proven and we can rely on it. But people want to do it and companies are selling the products. How do you think about that kind of dance where it is, you are doing real science and there are clinical trials and implications that are going along with that, but there's still a consumer landscape where there's not that regulation or there's not the education or information, and being able to say like, this is how we communicate to people what we've created and the benefits, while also saying like, there are other things out there that, frankly, just aren't quite proven just yet.
Yeah, well, we don't do diagnostic tests, so we can steer clear of that whole game and that competition. But you're right. There are a lot of supplements on the market today. If you've ever stood in a Whole Foods or whatever and just looked at the shelves and shelves of stuff, like it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming to me. What is even the difference between all these different things and what do they do? So I think our strategy has been less about how do we naysay the other things that are out there, because frankly, they're doing a just fine job on their own of doing that. I mean, as a consumer, the fact that it's so confusing means that you don't need to tell people like it's confusing or none of these things actually really work, because they're cycling through and trying to figure it out for themselves and hacking together like their own, game plan. And so I think what we've really focused our energies on is this is the benefit that you can get from our products. Here's how you're going to measure it. Here's how you're going to know it. Here's how you're going to feel it. And we're here for you to help you get through this process of getting a new microbiome. For some people, it is actually really hard. They start on these products and they're like, oh man, like my GI is strange. Like it's supposed to be like this. And so I think educating people and helping them understand what does it mean when your microbiome changes? What does it mean when you can lower your blood glucose spikes and not be on a crazy roller coaster all day? All of that's super important. So we really focus on what we've built, what people should experience when they're on the products, how it's going to help their health, like being able to lower your blood glucose spikes doesn't just help you on your, monitors. It helps you in so many different arenas of your health. Your energy levels, your post-lunch slump goes away, your sleep, your exercise, your endurance. Like there's all these other things that people benefit. So we really focus on that as opposed to trying to slam an already kind of like industry that feels like it's filled with snake oil.
Unfortunately, it's tough to navigate, and complicating that in some ways and creating a whole other debate and kind of hot button issue. We already kind of brought it up already, GLP-1s and how that affects, whether it's weight loss or metabolic health or diabetes, blood sugar, all those sorts of things, and where Pendulum is developing kind of a unique solution there. Can you just talk about maybe the differences between the drugs on the market as people think about them and what Pendulum has been able to do and maybe what that looks like going forward?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm a huge advocate of all the drugs that are out there on the market. These GLP-1 analogs have been around for decades. They are incredibly efficacious for people with diabetes. They really do help you lower your A1C, lower your blood glucose spikes, reduce your food cravings, help you make better choices. And they have measurable impact beyond that, even into cardiovascular health and all of that. So I'm a huge fan of them for people with diabetes. I think where it starts to get a little bit confusing is, well, gee, what if you don't have type 2 diabetes? What should you do? To some degree, as we age, we all kind of enter this spectrum of towards metabolic syndrome. So, well, gee, what if I don't have type 2 diabetes, but I have pre-diabetes? Is that still going to help me? Well, what if I don't have pre-diabetes, but I have obesity? Well, what if I don't have obesity? So it's like we're all on this spectrum where one end is like totally healthy and the other end is type 2 diabetes. And as we age, we just like move down this way. And so you're always trying to like counter that with all the things that you're doing. And these GLP-1 drugs have a role to play in that important one. What we're doing, which is different from that, is I think what a lot of people don't know, first of all, is that these GLP-1 drugs are a chemical mimic of your body's natural GLP-1 hormone. So your body naturally makes GLP-1 hormone. And these drugs were like, oh, that's a really important hormone for your A1C, your blood glucose spikes, your satiety. Let's make a mimic of it. That's the category of drugs. What we're doing is going after that natural GLP-1 hormone. And so when you eat food, you have these trillions of microbes, this factory in your gut that's metabolizing that food. And there are a sector of them whose job it is to then stimulate GLP-1 hormone so that when you eat food, GLP-1 hormone goes up. Your brain knows, okay, we're full, we just ate. And then you can manage actually all the sugars that you just ate in your food. The microbes that stimulate that natural GLP-1 hormone have never been in a product before. And that is our GLP-1 probiotic. You can't find it anywhere else. Nothing else has been clinically studied but that one. And so that's really our role there is, alongside these drugs in that they are a mimic of your body's natural hormone. And that's what we're helping to promote the production of.
Where do you fit on that spectrum of, whether it's age and chronic diseases and all the different ailments that fit, and who should be taking something like a injectable GLP-1 that's on the market? When you look at the Pendulum kind of portfolio of products, how are people making the choice? Like, which one do I choose? Basically, it's, do I use the one that is the kind of GLP-1 mimicking? Do I use one that's more the A1C, I think you mentioned? How do you think about who uses what and like how that decision is made?
Yeah, so pendulum glucose control is like the clinical version product, right? So it's for people with type 2 diabetes. It helps you lower your A1C and your blood glucose spikes. So it's kind of like the best in class, has all the strains at their highest concentration. The GLP-1 probiotic is a subset of those strains. So it's just the strains that, as I said, in this factory that help you increase your GLP-1. And so if you're really thinking like, well, I'm not so worried about those other things, but I really want to increase my satiety. Like I don't want to be craving sugars all the time, or I don't want to be craving, fast foods or carbs. That GLP-1 probiotic is for you. And so we know that after being on that product for 6 weeks, 91% of people have reduced food cravings using this diagnostic test called the food cravings inventory. And so that is, how we think about the GLP-1 versus the pendulum glucose control. And then there's like really sophisticated people who are like, I just want acromantia. So if you even know what acromantia is, you're like in this subcategory of people who are like really well versed on the microbiome, or maybe you took a microbiome test, and those people have decided they just want to increase their acromantia levels. Those tend to be people who have been reading a lot on their own, and they just feel like they're low in that one strain. But for general, I don't want to say normal people, for general people, if you've got diabetes, that's the glucose control. If you're trying to lower your food cravings, that's the GLP-1. If you just want to generally help your metabolic health, then that's the metabolic daily product.
And this might be just because I'm a bit of a novice when it comes to the science and research side. So hopefully you can fill me in. When you think about initially, you mentioned we're doing all this research and then we're running the trials and we're testing with people and we're seeing what the impact is like. How much of that is kind of starting with the end in mind? Hey, we want to target this particular condition or ailment or, chronic disease, and then working backwards. And how much is saying like, hey, let's see what we can reveal from just studying the microbiome and the various strands and applications, if that question even makes sense. Like, are you starting with something targeted in mind? And if so, like, do you already have the next kind of targets in mind?
I mean, my background is as a research scientist, and then I started my career in pharma developing drugs. And so, in those worlds, the way you're trained is you've got an end result that you're trying to impact, and then you're figuring out, like, how do I get to that end result? So, I'm trying to help people with type 2 diabetes. What are the different mechanisms that could help them improve diabetes? And then you're just playing this game of, like, how good am I guessing at, how Mother Nature works? And so, and then every once in a while you nail it and you're like, got it. But that's the game, as opposed to starting with, I got this ingredient, what can I do with it? And so it really is your first, you've got an end game in mind, and then you're using data to try to figure out, how do I alter a person's microbiome and help them with their diabetes? And so we do have a pipeline of additional things that are coming through R&D, and they have targets primarily around metabolism, but we're also exploring a couple of other states. But one of the really fascinating things about the microbiome that is different from any other drug development project I've ever worked on is that your microbiome is really core to all these different network systems in your body. And so the problem with drugs is usually like you figure this thing out. You're like, I'm trying to solve this problem. You figured out where you can impact it, and you go and create a drug that does that. The problem with drugs is that they do that. They're extremely efficacious. And that one problem. But then they create a bunch of other problems, because what you didn't think about is like, well, gee, how's the body going to recognize this chemical or not recognize it? And then these so-called side effects become really problematic. That's the problem with drugs. The thing I hadn't expected about the microbiome is actually when you introduce some of these strains and you're going after things like metabolic disease, yeah, you get that impact. But then you also get all these other additive benefits that you hadn't really been going after. So, for example, we don't go after digestion at all. We're going after improving your metabolism. But it turns out that if you can improve the way your body metabolizes foods, your digestion is better. You can now eat more foods than you used to be able to eat. And so it's this sort of like unexpected benefits, side effects, but in a good way, of really improving your gut health and improving your microbiome. I would say that's been kind of one of the most surprising things in a great way for me in the field.
Maybe a couple more questions before we wrap up. One, just thinking about these impacts, the way that you're going about the research and the applications, the intersection with both the need on the consumer side, but also the interest. How do you see a company like Pendulum and your approach impacting like traditional healthcare that is kind of backwards in how we think about treating disease versus preventing it? And is there an opportunity, and what does that look like to you, to like maybe have a different approach and be more prevention focused and have that impact?
Yeah, I mean, I could kiss you. Exactly. That's exactly, I think, the movement that we are squarely a part of. And so we think about the movement from healthcare to health span, just to totally steal a word from my friend Peter Attia. Healthcare is really centered around you're sick and I'm going to care for you. And what are all the tools to help you once you're sick? Health span is how do I live the healthiest life possible? And integrated into that is the idea of preventative medicine. And so it's not about wait until you're sick and then now all of a sudden all these tools are available to you. It's about how do you, if you feel great right now, how do you hold on to that? How do you do the things that keep you at that state and really increase your health span? And so, the microbiome and all kind of these unexpected benefits and all of that are really important for that. And one of the really big reasons why we brought pendulum glucose control to the consumer market instead of to the drug market was exactly for this reason. You don't have to have type 2 diabetes to take pendulum glucose control. You don't even have to have pre-diabetes to take it. You don't even have to have obesity to take it. You just have to believe that I care about how my body metabolizes glucose, and I'm going to do everything I can to try to improve that or maintain it where it's at now. So, for example, I don't have pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes, and I have been taking pendulum glucose control for years because I wore a continuous glucose monitor and I did a study on myself and I saw my blood glucose spikes go down. Peter Attia takes pendulum glucose control every day because he wore a continuous glucose monitor. He took his A1C measurements. And so I think that you don't have to be someone that is already sitting with type 2 diabetes in order to benefit from these things. And that's the kind of thing that's going to help you go from the system we live in now, which is healthcare for sick people, to health span for healthy people. And the big, huge battle to fight now is how do we as people start to get payers to cover things that are actually going to keep us from getting sick? And those are not things that they traditionally like to cover. They like to cover things that once you're already sick, that you actually can't even get coverage for things that aren't actually drugs. That's how terrible the catch 22 is here. And so I think the big movement that we're going to see a lot of people get behind, and I hope we can see change in, is this movement into from healthcare to health span and supporting products that help us all improve our health span.
Thinking about that shift, and I think a lot of listeners are nodding their head. Of course, I am in terms of what we want to see happen. Do you imagine Pendulum like actively advocating on the side of, hey, this is something that insurers and healthcare should pay for, and this is you've collected the data and you're able to show the efficacy for consumers and can make that pitch and maybe help turn the tide on the existing system?
Stay tuned. Yes. And if anybody wants to partner with us on that, I'm very excited. We have a small group of us that are all really excited about fighting that fight with products that have proven efficacy to help people. I almost feel like we need a different word than preventative medicine because that has so many connotations to it already. But I think this is the time where people are demanding that everybody in our health system really think about them and not the drug companies and what's benefiting those companies. And even the food companies. I mean, it's so crazy. One of the things these GLP-1 drugs have done is to really turn everything on its head. The fact that you've got these food companies that are all nervous now that people might not eat their shitty food that's killing everyone, it's great.
Yeah, I don't know if it's prevention and advocacy or whatever you call it, just really the companies, the founders, the science, hopefully all band together and make a change in a positive direction. I think we will definitely stay tuned for that. It sounds like a number of products in the pipeline and more to come on that front. So we'll be on the lookout. But for anyone who wants to learn more and also keep up, where should they go? Where can they find you?
You can check us out at pendulumlife.com, and we have on there all of our different products, but also, more importantly, all the data that supports them, all of the things that you can expect to benefit from, and just general information about the microbiome. So even if you're like, I'm not sure I want to try these products, but you want to learn more about gut health and metabolic health, all of that is at pendulumlife.com. And if you're a listener to this podcast, we also are offering a discount if you put in FIT, FITT, when you check out, you'll get a discount that applies to your first bottle of membership.
Perfect. That's great. I appreciate you doing that. And we'll make sure all that information, links, code is with the show notes. People can find it easily. And yeah, we're excited to continue to follow along and appreciate you making some time today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you got value from the conversation, please consider subscribing and sharing the podcast with a friend or colleague. It's a massive help. And if you want more content like this, including news and insights on the latest industry developments, subscribe to the Fitt Insider newsletter at insider.fit.co. And one more thing, you can learn more about our recruiting and consulting services at fit.co. That's FITT.co. I'll see you here next week.